Okay, so once again, Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing that Hashem has commanded. If a man takes a vow to Hashem or swears an oath to establish a prohibition upon himself, he shall not desecrate his word. According to that, to whatever comes out from his mouth, he will do." So just to parse this right away, there's a few things to notice. And one of them is that the command is to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel. Usually, the commandment is Moshe spoke to the children of Israel. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, teach the children of Israel the following. Here it's the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel. So the Ramban says the reason why is because oaths, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about oaths, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But we're going to move on to a discussion about how an oath could be nullified. Different ways an oath could be nullified. It could be nullified through a husband or a father of a girl nullifying the oath, or through going to a court to nullify the oath. That's a little distracting. Or to go to the court to nullify the oath. So if people knew, if the general public was aware that if they made an oath, they would be able to get rid of it, they might take it less seriously. So it's not necessarily something that you teach the general public. There's some things that you don't want to necessarily teach in public, but if somebody has an issue, they'll go to discuss it with the rabbi. The rabbi will let them know, yes, there's a way to get out of this. There's a heter. There's a way to avoid the problem. So this seems, the Ramban understands that this is something that might not necessarily be taught to everybody, and it might just be taught to the leaders. And if someone comes to them and says, "Rabbi, I made this oath. I don't know what to do because the following happened and it's preventing me from doing what I need," the rabbi will say, "Okay, there's something we could do about that." And this is true about halachas in general. Is that there are some halachas that it takes a lot of thought to decide, is this something that I should teach to the public or not? Because some things have very some halachas, some laws have very minute details that make differences that the general public might not be aware of. Someone has to actually spend months or years or a lifetime studying them to really get a hold of how to apply these laws to different situations. So sometimes it's better just to leave it as, if there's a question, ask a rabbi, rather than teach the details, because it's very easy to leave something out and get it wrong. But another reason why, which is expressed by the commentaries, why this is taught, why it says to speak to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel, is because, like I mentioned, one of the ways to nullify a vow, is through going to a court or an individual expert and have a great rabbi, and they can annul, the court can annul it, and this court would be the heads of the tribes, they would be the leaders of the people. So that's why this is taught to them. But like I said, we're talking about vows here. And in verse 3 we said, if a man takes a vow to Hashem or swears an oath to establish a prohibition upon himself, he shall not desecrate his word. According to whatever comes from his mouth, shall he do. So there's two interesting things here. First of all, it says that he takes a vow or swears an oath to establish a prohibition upon himself. That's a very interesting expression, and it really brings to the fore the real meaning of what a neder, what this kind of vow is. And that is that they're in I would say yeshivish thought, or really in Torah thought, in especially in the brisker way of looking at things in the Torah, many times when they think about a prohibition or they think about a mitzvah, it comes down to a question of, is this a mitzvah on the gavra or on the chefza? Which means that there's a question if the prohibition or the positive commandment is about the thing that we're dealing with, or it's on the person. And in this case, that has many applications, but in this case, it's very specifically that the Torah says that what this oath does is makes the thing prohibited to him. That means that it's incredible power. It tells us the incredible power a person's words have. It doesn't mean that if a person says, I am not going to do the following, so then they're bound to keep their word, and there's a prohibition on them from doing the thing they said they wouldn't do or they swore that they wouldn't do because they have to keep their word. That's not the way these oaths are working. The thing that they proclaim prohibited actually becomes prohibited it actually becomes intrinsically prohibited to them. And to the point that the usual way, or the way that the Gemara expresses the idea of a neder, the idea of this kind of oath, is that if a person says that the following item should be to me like a korban, like an offering, meaning that not that I am not, let's say a person wants to ensure that they won't eat let's say they want to avoid saturated fat, and so they want to make sure that they won't eat any red meat, and they won't fall to that temptation. So the person might say that all red meat to me is like a korban, it's like an offering, it's like something that's off limits because it's sanctified to Hashem. That is the normalized way of expressing this neder, expressing this oath of prohibition. And it's not that if a person says that I'm not going to eat any red meat, he has an obligation to keep his word, like we said, but red meat actually becomes prohibited to him like anything else that's unkosher. That whatever, that if he makes that neder, he makes that oath, red meat becomes to him the same as pig. It's intrinsically prohibited by the Torah. Yet we'll see that you could annul such a vow, and then it becomes permitted once again. So let's continue there. And one more thing I wanted to say on this verse is that the prohibition is here, he shall not desecrate his word. It's also an interesting expression, not that he cannot violate his word, but he cannot desecrate his word. And desecrate, the Hebrew is lo yachel devaro, which means, it comes from the word hulin, which means, it's sometimes translated as profane, but it means not holy, secular. And that's this expression of desecrate. Desecrate means taking something holy and treating it in a non-holy manner. And what we're saying is that a person cannot treat their words, their power of speech, like it's something that's completely secular, devoid of spiritual meaning and devoid of spiritual power. And Reb Shimon Schwab just speaks this out. Very nice way is that he says that if you look about speech in general, speech is an incredible thing. The power to talk and the power to communicate that human beings have is incredible. That we could have a thought, even a very complicated thought in our mind, and be able to move that thought into someone else's mind through just making sounds with our mouth. And we have a thought, we express that thought, the other person hears it, processes it, and it moves from our mind into their mind. And that's an incredible thing, that we have that ability to connect with another person. And that's the power of speech that's Hashem gave to mankind, that animals don't have. They could communicate some rudimentary things, but not to such a sophisticated degree. And but Jews have an extra power of their speech, which is a spiritual aspect of their speech, that we can actually change the spiritual fabric of creation. That we could take something that's completely permitted, that there's no prohibition in the Torah, and actually make this thing spiritually prohibited to ourselves. And it goes to show really the power that our speech has, and to treat that lightly would be and to treat that as if our voice and our words and our speech doesn't have spiritual significance, would be desecrating that. Okay, so moving on in verse 4.
Rabbi, I've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
So if one utters something with, like you said, with the sound of his voice, and it may change the mind of someone else, the person that's listening to it, who's going to be responsible for if an action is taken upon that utterance? Who is then responsible for it?
Both. Meaning, ultimately, every person's responsible for their own actions. So whoever does something is ultimately responsible for what's done. But the influence a person has also is something that's rewarded and punished, that we're seeing that someone might be seen as a cause, whatever level of cause they are, a cause for whatever was done. And with there's one exception there, and that's someone who convinces somebody to worship idols is actually an independent prohibition in the Torah. That the convincing of someone else to worship idols is called a mesis umediach. That's a specific prohibition in the Torah, where that it's not that the cause of someone else doing, it's not that they're seen as a cause for someone else's violation. They actually violated a separate prohibition. But otherwise, everyone, I mean, this is true in that case also, everyone's responsible for their actions, but to whatever degree someone influences someone else, they're held to account.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So now in verse 4, but if a woman will take a vow to Hashem or establish a prohibition in her father's home in her youth, and her father heard of her vow or the prohibition that she established upon herself, and her father was silent about her, then all her vows shall stand, and any prohibition that she established upon herself shall stand. But if her father restrained her on the day of the hearing, all her vows or prohibitions that she established upon herself shall not stand, and Hashem will forgive her, for her father had restrained her. So here is teaching that when a young woman is in her father's house, that means she's not yet married. According to Torah law, a woman could be married from a very young age, and technically she could be married once she's born. And it's done through until she's grown up, which is the point of a Bagers, I believe, until she's 12 and a half usually. So her father is actually able to marry her off to someone else. So, and during that time, while she's still in her father's house, meaning if she's not married, her father has the ability to nullify any vow that she makes. I shouldn't say every, but to nullify vows that she makes if he nullifies it on the same day that he heard about the vow. That's what's expressed here. But if he did not nullify it on the day that he heard it, so then it will stand. It cannot be nullified later by the father. Now in verse 7, if she shall be married to a man and her vows were upon her, or an utterance of her lips, and turning to page 903, by which she had prohibited something upon herself, and her husband heard, and the day he heard he was silent about her, then her vows shall stand, and her prohibition that she established upon herself shall stand. Similar rules with a husband as well. And this is even when she's grown up. This is about an adult wife as well, which sounds strange nowadays, but an adult wife, her vows can also be nullified by the husband as long as he nullifies it on the same day that he hears. And it continues in verse 9, but if on the day of her husband's hearing he shall restrain her, and he shall revoke the vow that is upon her, the utterance of her lips, for which she had prohibited something upon herself, then Hashem will forgive her. And the commentaries talk about this forgiveness. And they say that if the vow is nullified, and she, let's say, doesn't follow the previous vow, there's no need for forgiveness in that case, because it was nullified. Nullified means that it doesn't exist and it's non-existent. And the commentators say that when we say Hashem will forgive her, we're talking about a case where she thinks that the vow was nullified, but it was really not. Or as some commentators say at different times, that it may be talking about where she violated the vow but didn't know that. So that the vow was nullified. She didn't know that and didn't follow the vow in spite of that. So even though the vow wasn't there was still need for forgiveness. Okay, and continuing on in verse 10, the vow of a widow or a divorcee, anything she has prohibited upon herself shall remain upon her. There's no husband to annul that. And where am I? I'm going to skip a little bit because there's some repetition. There's always reason for repetition, but I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara of Nedarim. And so skipping to verse 14, we're still talking about a woman, an adult woman who's married. And it states, any vow or any oath prohibition to cause personal affliction, her husband may let it stand, and her husband may revoke it. So here we have a limitation as to what vows a husband could annul. Here it says a husband can annul vows that have, how do they translate this? Any oath prohibition to cause personal affliction. For example, if a woman were to say that she is prohibiting showers to herself, that a shower should be prohibited to herself, or eating good food, should be prohibited to herself. So in that case, the husband can revoke it because she's making an oath that causes herself affliction. So the husband could revoke it, but once again, only on the day that he heard about it. Another instance, the Gemara says that a husband could annul the vows of his wife are vows that could be detrimental to the marriage, meaning vows that come between the husband and the wife. And an example of that might be if she makes a vow, besides the personal affliction aspect, if she makes a vow that she won't shower. Or an example given by the Gemara is that if she prohibits cosmetics to herself, that if a woman were to make a vow that cosmetics and makeup is prohibited to her, so in normal case that would take effect, but the husband could revoke that because on the day that he heard about it, once again, because he has, because it's something that is relevant to their relationship, that she should, that it may be appropriate for her to put on cosmetics for the benefit of their relationship. So in that case, the husband could revoke that vow. And the Gemara also says that that she doesn't have the ability to swear an oath prohibiting something that's a contractual obligation. So so if a wife, let's say, would swear an oath prohibiting, let's say, marital relations, so in that case, that oath wouldn't even take effect because that's a contractual obligation as part of the marriage. Part of the contract of a marriage is that they'll be intimate with each other. So that wouldn't even take effect because she can't prohibit something that she's contractually obligated to do. Okay, so moving on. And on the bottom of page 903, chapter 31, it states, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, take vengeance for the children of Israel against the Midianites. Afterwards you will be gathered unto your people. So we didn't have a class for Parshas Pinchas because of the fast, because of Shabbat B'Tammuz. So just a summary, what are we taking revenge? But we did do Balak. So at the end of Balak, it states that the, back up a little bit. On page 875, chapter 25, it's introduced, the Israel settled in the Shittim, and the people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of Moab. They invited the people to the feasts of their gods, and the people ate and prostrated themselves to their gods. And then it says in verse 6, behold, a man of the children of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman near to his brothers in the sight of Moshe and the sight of the entire assembly of the children of Israel, and they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And this person, Pinchas, went in and killed. That Pinchas went in and he publicly demonstrated that he was going to have relations with this Midianite woman in spite of, and publicly in front of Moshe, in spite of Moshe's objection. So Pinchas went in and killed them both. So, but it's clear, it's very interesting here that it says that the Moabites, that they sinned with Moabite women, and then afterwards it said that he was sinning with a Midianite woman. And the Alshich says, he points out that it could be inferred that the Midianites were very heavily involved from the fact that over here in our Parsha, once again, page 905, we're commanded to take revenge against the Midianites for having perpetrated that crime against the Jewish people, that they caused their daughters to seduce us. And our sages say that this was in fact a plan of Bilam, that this was advice that Bilam gave after he found that he couldn't curse the Jewish people. So he advised them to cause the Jewish people to sin, and this was what they did, is that they sent the women to entice the Jewish men, and once the women had the men, they caused them to worship their idols. Okay, so once again, Hashem told Moshe, on the bottom of page 903, take vengeance for the children of Israel against the Midianites. Afterwards you'll be gathered unto your people. And in verse 3, Moshe spoke to the people, saying, arm men from amongst yourself for the legion, that they may be against Midian, to inflict Hashem's vengeance against Midian. 1,000 from a tribe, 1,000 from a tribe. For all the tribes of Israel shall you send the legion. So very interestingly, you see that when Hashem spoke to Moshe, he said, take vengeance for the children of Israel. meaning that they're instructed to avenge themselves for the Midian, what the Midianites did to them. Whereas Moshe's instruction to the people was, take vengeance for Hashem. Meaning, rather than take vengeance for yourself, take vengeance for Hashem. And Reb Shimon Schwab said that Moshe was concerned that the people, if it was for themselves, they wouldn't be so into it. They might think, that a person would weigh, is what it would take to inflict their revenge worth it for what I'm gaining? What am I losing? What am I gaining? Going to war is a very stressful thing. It's a very dangerous thing. A person might think it's not worth it for this, just to experience the pleasure or the sensation of revenge. So Moshe told them to avenge Hashem's honor, in which case they would be much more alacritous in performing that. So it continues. So there were delivered, in verse 5, so there were delivered from the thousands of the children of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 men armed for the legion. Moshe sent them 1,000 from each tribe for the legion, them and Pinchas, son of Elazar, the Kohen, to the legion, and the sacred vessels and the trumpets for sounding in his hand. The Chizkuni points out that Moshe did not lead them himself into battle, which he did previously when they fought against Sichon, they fought against Sichon and Og. Moshe did not lead them in battle in this instance. And the Chizkuni says the reason why is because when Moshe was chased out of Egypt by the Pharaoh after he had killed an Egyptian, so he was gone from Egypt for a long time, and decades. I think the Ramban said it had to have been at least 60 years, because he was 80 years old when he came back, and it said he left a short time after he had just grown up. He had just reached adulthood. So it was at least 60 years. He was gone, and he took refuge amongst the Midianites. And in fact, he married the daughter of Yisro, who lived amongst the Midianites. So since Moshe had taken refuge, they gave him refuge. He felt it would be inappropriate for him to lead battle against them. It would be against the spirit of gratitude. So he sent an emissary. He sent Pinchas. Why Pinchas? So Rashi says because Pinchas was the one who began the revenge, to avenge Hashem's honor. When Pinchas took the spear and slew Zimri and Cosbi, slew the one who publicly was taking this Midianite woman into his tent. So because Pinchas began the avenging of Hashem's honor, so he was given the opportunity to lead the conclusion of that revenge. So in verse 7, they massed against Midian as Hashem had commanded Moshe, and they killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian along with their slain ones, and the 5 kings of Midian, etc., the 5 kings of Midian, and Bilam, son of Ba'ar, they slew with the sword. So now Bilam was finally killed, who was their antagonist in the desert. And then in verse 9 it says, the children of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their young children, and all their cattle and flocks and all their wealth they took as spoils. All the cities of the habitation and all the palaces they burned in fire. They took all the booty, the spoils of war, and the assembly of the children of Israel, and all the captives of people and animals, they brought them to Moshe, etc. And then in verse 13, Moshe, Elazar, the Kohen, and all the leaders of the assembly went out to meet them, and they saw them coming. And in verse 15, Moshe said to them, did you let every female live? Behold, they caused the children of Israel by the word of Bilam to commit a betrayal against Hashem regarding the matter of Ba'ar, and the plague occurred in the assembly of Hashem. So now kill every male among the young children, and every woman fit to know a man by lying with a male. You shall kill any woman who is old enough to have to sleep with a man. But all the young children among the women who have not known lying with a male, you may keep alive for yourself as a captive. And as for you, encamp outside the camp. Once again, you have to go through a purification process for having come in contact with the dead. So, and this is what they did, that they killed all the males and all the females who were old enough to have had relations with a man, and everyone else they left alive. All the young girls, really, they left alive as captives. So, what were they thinking? Why was it? Rav Shimon Schwab discusses 2 questions, really. What were they thinking that they kept the women alive if they were commanded to take revenge? And Why was it that Hashem, it says Moshe was angry in verse 14, Moshe was angry with the commanders of the army, the officers of the thousands and the officers of the hundreds. It doesn't mention the one he should have been most angry with, and that's Pinchas, because Pinchas was the one who was leading the entire army. So why was he angry with the commanders, the officers of the thousands, the officers of the hundreds? Why not the officer, the leader of the entire army, Pinchas? Why was it that he's not mentioned as someone that Moshe was angry with, especially since he's the one who was mentioned by name, the one person who was mentioned by name as being the one who went out to battle? So Shimon Schwab answers, and this is based on what I said before, about Hashem told them, Moshe, to take revenge for themselves. Moshe told them to take revenge for Hashem. If you look at what they did, where am I? So it says in verse 7, it says, they massed against Midian as Hashem had commanded Moshe, and they killed every male. So he understands that they massed against Midian as Hashem had commanded Moshe, meaning that their intention, or what they were acting as Hashem commanded Moshe, which was to avenge themselves, not as Moshe had commanded them, which was to avenge Hashem's honor. And he says that the difference between the two is that if they were taking revenge for themselves, once again, there's a cost-benefit analysis they make, that what is this revenge worth to me? And it makes sense they kill all the males, but take the females as captives because they might have less hostility to the females, because they weren't the ones, even though the females were the ones who actually perpetrated the crimes by seducing them. But they weren't the ones who made the plans and who were running the country. So they're more valuable, and they're valuable as captives. So the cost-benefit analysis, they'll kill all the males and keep the women as captives alive. So, but if they did as Moshe had commanded, which was to take revenge for Hashem's honor, in that case, it would kill everybody because there's no benefit to take into account for keeping them alive. And so Pinchas, so their issue, once again, so their problem was that they were taking revenge for the Jewish people, not taking revenge for Hashem's honor. Pinchas had already done that. Pinchas had already completed that mitzvah of avenging Hashem's honor over this tragedy, and he did that by publicly putting himself in danger by killing Cosby and Zimri. So killing the people who are publicly desecrating Hashem's name. So by doing that, he already put in the repair that was necessary for himself. It was the rest of the people needed to fix that aspect. They needed to do an act of avenging Hashem's honor, which, so that's why Moshe was angry at them and not at Pinchas. Okay, and this paragraph ends, and this is on page 907, verse 20. It says, in every garment, every vessel of hide, everything made of goat's hair, every vessel of wood, you shall purify. So he was telling them they had to purify the things that they took. And then they gave instructions of exactly how to do it. In verse 21, Elazar the Kohen said to the men of the legion who came to the battle, this is the decree of the Torah which Hashem has commanded Moshe. Only the gold and the silver, the copper, the iron, the tin, the lead, basically the metal, everything that comes into the fire, you shall pass through the fire, but it must be purified with the water of the sprinkling. And everything that would not come into the fire, you shall pass through the water. You shall immerse your garments on the seventh day, become purified. Afterwards, you may enter the camp. What's this talking about? He's telling them that they have to kosher the vessels that they captured as spoils of war. They had to, because the Midianites were using it with cooking non-kosher, so they would have to make it kosher. And how do you do that? So it says that anything that passed through fire, once again, anything that comes into the fire, you shall pass through the fire. Meaning, this is the way that we kosher, that we make non-kosher kosher. If someone were to inadvertently, let's say, cook milk in a meat pot, so now that pot is treif, it's not kosher, And in order to make it kosher, they would have to, if it's a pot, let's say, that's used with water, they'd have to do what's called hagala, which is they would have to purge the non-kosher from the walls of the vessel by removing it the same way that it got in. So if it got in through a liquid medium, through, let's say, being boiled in water, or being boiled, they'd have to boil water and get that boiling water over the entire surface, inside and outside. So what they'd usually do, which Rabbi Slatus gave the class before Pesach and how to do kosher Pesach vessels, is you'd fill up a pot with water, or either you dip it into a bigger pot full of boiling water, that's the easier way, and then run it under cold water, or you would fill up the pot with boiling water and then get let's say a rock that is very hot. You'd heat up a rock so it won't cool off the water and drop the rock in so the water will spill over the sides and the boiling water in that case would coat the sides, and that would make it kosher. That's something that becomes non-kosher through a liquid medium. Whereas something that's directly on the fire, let's say the grate of a grill or a broiler, or maybe even a frying pan, so in that case, you would need more than that. It would actually have to be heated till it was red hot, because that's used directly with a fire, not with a liquid medium, so it has to be heated directly by fire to make it kosher. But there's an additional thing that the verse says here. It says, after whatever comes into the fire, you shall pass through the fires, once again, verse 22, or 23, but it must be purified with the water of the sprinkling. So on a surface level, that's referring, the water of the sprinkling is the water of the sprinkling of the red cow that has ashes of the red cow, which is something that's used to make it something pure that came in contact with the dead. But our sages actually derive something else from this verse, that the Hebrew for the water of the sprinkling is mei nida, which literally could be read as the water of a menstruating woman. And they understand this to mean that the same water that a woman who's impure through menstruation goes to become pure, these vessels have to go into as well, which is a mikvah. And this is the source that that any vessel that we acquire from a non-Jew has to be dipped in the mikvah, has to be toiveled in the toiveling mikvah to become, for us to use it. And interestingly, I saw this explained, is that it's in a way a conversion process. But this is even if it's a brand new vessel. You go to Walmart, you buy a pot from Walmart. That thing has never been used. There's no question of it being kosher or not kosher. It's never been used. It still needs to be toiveled because it was owned by a non-Jew. It's owned by Sam Walton or whoever owns Walmart now. And before that, it was owned by whoever owns the manufacturing. And now it's moving into a Jewish household. So it needs a conversion the same way that a convert would go dip in the mikveh to join the Jewish people. So for something any vessel that we're using for our cooking or our food consumption, for the most part, would also need a conversion to become part of our family, part of our house. Okay, then the Torah goes through a lengthy explanation of how exactly they split up the spoils of war. I'm going to split that for the most part. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna skip that, but it gives a lengthy. We still have a whole nother parsha I have to do, but it gives a lengthy section on just how exactly the spoils of war were split up. Then the next topic on page 911, verse 32, it states the children of Reuven and the children of Gad. Once again, page 911. Chapter 32, verse 1. The children of Reuven, the children of Gad had abundant livestock. Once again, these are the descendants of these two tribes, the tribe of Reuven and the tribe of Gad. They had abundant livestock. That's usually referring to sheep and goats. Very great. They saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, it was a place for livestock. So now once again, they're not in the land of Israel yet. They're still on the the east side of the Jordan River. They haven't crossed the Jordan into Israel proper. But they liked the land that they were in. They already conquered it. They conquered from the Midianite king Sichon and Og. The Amorite king Sichon and Og, and they liked it. And they came to Moshe, Elazar, the Kohen, leaders of the assembly, saying, Ataras, Divan, Yazer, Nimrah, Cheshbon, Elas, Savam, Nevo, Ba'on. The land that Hashem smote before the children of the assembly of Israel is the land for livestock. Your servants have livestock. They say, this land's perfect for us. It's the perfect land for raising sheep and goats. We have lots of sheep and goats. We're a good match for this. And in verse 5, they said, if we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not bring us across the Jordan. So they asked, rather than bring us across the Jordan River and give us a portion in the land of Israel proper, we want this as our portion, this land that we conquered across the river in Transjordan for ourselves. And Moshe said to the children of God, the children of Reuben, he got angry at them and said, shall your brothers go out to battle while you settle here? Why do you dissuade the hearts of the children of Israel from crossing the land that Hashem had given them? He was saying, besides the issue, which we'll talk about, besides the issue of you not wanting a portion in the land of Israel, you'd rather have a portion elsewhere that's not Israel proper. It might be somewhat attached to Israel, but it's not Israel proper. But your brethren are about to cross the Jordan and do battle and conquer the land that was given to us. And when they see you pulling out and saying you want to stay here, you don't want to go in to conquer the land, they'll lose morale, and that will cause the people to feel that we're losing 2 whole tribes from our army, and if they must be afraid of doing battle. That's why they want to stay here, and that will cause a morale problem with the rest of their brethren. And in verse 8, this is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. And he gives the entire, or a shortened summary of what happened with the spies. That after the spies, they said that we don't want to go up to the land. We don't want the land of Israel, and that entire generation had to die in the desert because of that. And they wandered for 38 more years. Because of that. So in verse 14, on page 913, verse 14, behold, you have risen up in the place of your fathers, a society of sinful people, to add more to the burning wrath of Hashem against Israel. For if you will turn away from him, he will again let it rest in the wilderness. You will destroy this entire people. He's saying that we had a problem before. 38 years earlier, the people didn't want to go into Israel, and they spent another, once again, 38 years in the desert until that generation died out because of that. And he's saying, now you're telling me again you don't want to go? So in verse 16, they clarified, they approached him and said, pens for the flock shall be built here for livestock and cities for our small children. We shall arm ourselves swiftly in the vanguard of the children of Israel until we have brought them to the land, brought them to their place, and our small children will dwell in the fortified cities before the inhabitants of the land. So they clarified and said, we're going to go, we're not going to leave the army. What we'll do is we'll build accommodations for our flocks. We'll rebuild at least the fortified cities for our children and our wives. They'll stay here, but they said, we'll go in the vanguard. That means we're going to go at the head of the army to fight against inhabitants of the land. So even though they're asking to not have a portion in the land of Israel, they're volunteering that they're going to lead the battle. They're going to be in the front of the battle for the land of Israel. And Moshe agreed to that. That Moshe agreed to. And skipping a little bit. And so now on page 915, verse 33, it states, so Moshe gave to them, to the children of Gad and the children of Reuben, and half the tribe of Manasseh, son of Yosef, the kingdom of Sichon, king of the Amorite, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, the land with its cities and the boundaries and the cities of the surrounding lands. So he gave them those lands that they conquered on the east side of the Jordan. You'll notice something that should stick out here, that in the negotiations between the tribes and Moshe, it was the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad. Now we have half the tribe of Manasseh involved as well. So how did that happen? So the Ramban says that Moshe recognized that it was a very big land and it was too big just to give to 2 tribes. So he went to the tribes and asked if there was anyone else who wants to have their portion there as well. And some of Manasseh agreed to that as well, 2 families of Manasseh. Machir and Gilad, I think, were the 2 families of Manasseh that agreed to this. And but they point out that it says half the tribe of Manasseh, But they point out that the half here does not mean literally a half. It means a fraction of Menashe, and it was actually much smaller than a half. I don't remember. I think it was two families out of 10 of Menashe, but I think it came out to about 1/10 of their population stayed on Transjordan, and 9/10. I could be wrong on that number, but it was a small fraction who stayed in Transjordan, and 9/10 took their portion in the land of Israel proper, from the tribe of Manasseh. Okay, and it talks about what they did, what they conquered and what they built, the names of the cities, and just one of them that I'll deal with a little bit is on verse 39, page 915, verse 39, it states, the children of Machir, son of Menashe, went to Gilead and occupied it, and drove out the Amorite who were in it. Moshe gave the Gilead to Machir, son of Menashe, and he settled in it. And so Machir, son of Menashe, settled in this area called Gilead. And this was a prominent family of Menashe. He was, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong, but he was the ancestor of the daughters of Tzolachad, who we also missed last week, but they're at the end of the second Parsha of Masei. It discusses them. So they were descendants of Machir, son of Menashe. And I believe Gidon, who was one of the prominent judges, one of the prominent leaders of the Jewish people in the time in between when they settled in the land and when the first king Shaul was anointed as the king of the Jewish people, he was also a descendant of Machir, son of Menashe. I believe he came from Gilead. So it says that he settled in it, and verse 41, Yair, son of Menashe, went and occupied the villages and called them Chavas Yair. That's the villages of Yair. And then it says that Novach went and occupied Kenas and her suburbs and called it Novach after his name. Okay. I'll skip what I have to say on this to get to the next Parsha this week is Parsha's Masei, Chaim. Page 919, chapter 33, verse 1. It begins, these are the journeys of the children of Israel who went forth from the land of Egypt according to their legions under the hand of Moshe and Aaron. Moshe wrote their goings forth according to their journeys at the bidding of Hashem, and these were their journeys according to their journeys forth. And then it lists all the journeys that they went. They went from here to here, and then from here to here, here to here. It gives their entire route through the desert, and it has 42 legs of the journey. There's 42 trips that they made from here to here, here to here, here to here. 42 stops, I should say, from when they left Egypt until this point. And why is this mentioned? So one of the reasons, I think Rashi says this, Rashi says that one of the reasons it's mentioned is that we know that it was decreed that the entire generation has to die out, the entire generation of the sin of the spies had to die out, and they were to wander through the desert for 40 years. So you might take that to mean that they're constantly moving, they're constantly traveling, they're going from here to here to here to here, place to place to place to place. And here it's telling us that's not in fact the case, that in the 38 years in the desert, or really I should say the 40 years in the desert, there were only 42, if you count them, there are only 42 trips. So that will equal out to an average of a trip a year. But that is not accurate, because if you look at the trips that they made, if you subtract the trips that they made before they ever came to, before the sin of the spies, where they were traveling not in a direct line, but they were traveling to Israel before there was ever a decree for them to be wandering in the desert, and you subtract the journeys afterwards, you're only left the journeys after those until they started heading for the land of Israel and that decree was over, you're only left with 20. That 22 of the journeys were either before the decree was made, before the decree that they were to wander in the desert was made, or after the decree was finished and they were on their way to the land of Canaan. But so there were only so over those 38 years that they were wandering in the desert, they only made 20 trips. To tell us that most of the time in the desert they were actually settled. And they weren't traveling that much. They were just settled in one place in the desert for a length of time. Okay, and that ends on the bottom of page 921, verse 50. It states, Hashem spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan to the land of Canaan, you shall drive out the inhabitants of the land before you. You shall destroy all their prostration stones, all their molten images shall you destroy. All their high places shall you demolish. We should be like the protesters, destroy all the statues. Verse 53, you shall possess the land, you shall settle in it, for to you I have given the land to possess it. It's not theirs, it's given to you. Destroy all their deities that they worship. And in 54, you shall give the land as an inheritance by lot to your families. To the many, you shall increase its inheritance. For the few, you shall decrease its inheritance. What that means is very cryptic, and there's many, many, many pages of commentary even from the basic commentaries on a simple understanding of what that means. That is apportioned by lot, but to the many you should have more, for the less you should have less. What does that mean? And just that's more of a Pinchas topic, which we missed. But one thing the way the Malbim understands this, which I think is the easiest understanding, is that they had basic portions for each tribe that they had, and not assigned to any tribe, but they had basic areas that they gave apportioned by lottery to the tribes. Once each portion was assigned to a tribe, they adjusted the borders to accommodate the size of the tribes, to make sure that every tribe had an area that was appropriate for the size of the tribe. But what area each tribe has is how the Malbim understands. The Ramban disagrees with it strongly. But the Malbim understands that what area each tribe has was given by lottery, and how big each area was adjusted based on how many people were in the tribe. Okay, so the next topic in chapter 33, verse 1. I didn't finish this, but in verse 55, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, those of them whom you leave shall be pins in your eyes and thorns in your side, and they will harass you upon the land which you dwell, and it shall be that what I had meant to do to them, I shall do to you. And this is what happened, in fact, is that they did not destroy all the inhabitants of the land, and they were a constant pin in their eyes and a thorn in their sides. They constantly gave trouble to the Jewish people. They gave them physical trouble. That the book of Judges is full of instances where the inhabitants of the land, the Amorites, the Midianites, the Philistines, and even the Canaanites, conquered them and had them pay tribute and oppress them. And they were a spiritual danger and a spiritual thorn in their side as well, that they seduced many of the Jewish people and introduced their deities and caused the Jews to worship their deities. Okay, and then the next topic on page 923 is the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. There's a picture on the bottom of 923 if you would like to see, but it delineates the boundaries of where exactly the land of Israel is and what's given to them. And skipping a little bit over here. So skipping to page 927, chapter 35. So once again, page 927, chapter 35. It states, Hashem spoke to Moshe in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, Command the children of Israel that they shall give to the Levites from the heritage of their possessions cities for dwelling, and open spaces for the cities all around them shall you give to the Levites. That the Levites were not given a specific portion in the land of Israel. They were not given an area of land or region for them. Their job was not to be farming and making money. Their job was to be doing the service and doing the holy work. But they needed places to live. They were given cities to live in amongst the tribes. That within the territories of the tribes, there were cities for the Levim, for the Levites. And it says, open spaces for the cities all around them shall give the Levites. And Rashi explains this, that they had, these open spaces were 1,000 cubits around the city. And that 1,000 cubits was to be left bare. And that was to beautify the city, that you had this open area around the city. And around that, they had another 1,000, according to Rashi, they had another 1,000 cubits of area that was for, for growing things and for keeping their animals, etc. That's where the farms were and keeping their animals. Whatever other areas they needed to actually use were farther out. Okay, and then in verse 6, on page 929, it states, the cities that you shall give to the Levites, the 6 cities of refuge that you shall provide for a murderer to flee there, and in addition to them you shall give 42 cities. So the Levites really had 48 cities. 6 of those 48, though, were designated as the cities of refuge where a murderer was to flee. And the cities of refuge would only protect a murderer if he killed through unintentionally, I should say, but when not fully negligently. That there has to be an element of negligence, and the Rambam actually explains that there are different levels of murder, how they're punished. A person who kills intentionally with malice is put to death. That's the capital crime. Murder is a capital crime. He's put to death. If a person kills not intentionally, but with a great degree of negligence. For example, let's say a person is on a construction site and he's throwing cinder blocks out of the third story window onto the sidewalk without looking what's going on in the middle of the day. So that person is not acting in malice with intent to kill, but there's such a degree of negligence, he calls this karv lemezid, which means that it's close to intentional, because it's such a degree of negligence that it's close to intentional. So such a person would, the cities of refuge would not protect him, and a close relative of the deceased would be able to kill him without any consequences from the courts. That he's given into the hands of the redeemer of the blood, meaning a close relative of the victim. But if the person killed unintentionally, but not completely accidentally, for example, if let's say a person is climbing down a ladder and yes, I believe this is the case. If a person's climbing down a ladder and he slips and falls and lands on someone, and the impact kills the person. So in that case, the person did not kill intentionally. He killed unintentionally, but there's a degree of negligence, because when a person is climbing down a ladder especially, they should be careful because they're moving in that direction already. They should be careful not to fall and move too fast down. And therefore, they carry some burden of fault. And in that case, they have to flee to the city of refuge. And if they ever leave the city of refuge, the close relative of the victim would be able to kill them once again without consequences to take revenge. But while they're in the city of refuge, or really any city of the Levites would be considered a city of refuge for that, they're safe. And they have to stay there until the Kohen Gadol dies. Why is it dependent on the death of the Kohen Gadol? So our sages say that Aaron, the original Kohen Gadol, the original High Kohen, is described by Pirkei Avos as a lover of peace and a pursuer of peace. And if a Kohen Gadol would really follow in the footsteps of their ancestor Aaron and their predecessor Aaron, and they loved peace and pursued peace, so they would be praying for the Jewish people to not have any murders and to live in peace without any killings. And from the fact that it's happening, that's seen as a strike against them. So the punishment for an unintentional murderer is dependent on their life. And the Gemara says that the mothers of the Kohen Gadol would go around to the city of refuge, bringing food to the people there, so they'd have good feelings towards him and not be praying for his death. So they'd go around bringing cookies to the people in exile there. Okay, and the Parsha ends on page 933, chapter 36, with an issue. We didn't discuss the daughters of Tzlafchad. Rabbi Slater spoke about them in his between Mincha and Meir for those who were there on Shabbos, who were able to be there on Shabbos. But the daughters of Tzalafchad were, a man had died without any children, and without any sons. So his daughters, and it came out after a discussion that his daughters were to inherit his portion in the land of Israel. So, he was from the tribe of Manasseh. So in verse 1 it states on page 933 of chapter 36, the heads of the fathers of the family of the children of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, of the families of the children of Yosef, like I said, a descendant of Machir, son of Manasseh, approached and spoke before Moshe, and they said in verse 2, Hashem has commanded my master to give the land as an inheritance by lot to the children of Israel, and my master had been commanded by Hashem to give the inheritance of Tzalafchad, our brother, to his daughters. Now in verse 3, they saw a problem with that. If they become wives to one of the sons of the tribes of the children of Israel, then their inheritance will be subtracted from the inheritance of our fathers and be added to the inheritance of the tribe in which they will marry, and will be subtracted from the lot of our inheritance. And when the Jubilee will arrive for the children of Israel, and their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they will marry, and from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers will their inheritance be subtracted. So to be clear, two things are going into this problem. First of all, a person's tribe is dictated by their father's tribe. So a Jew is the same tribe as the tribe of their father. And the land of Israel was apportioned to the tribes. Each tribe, for the most part, except for Manasseh, we say had a split portion, but each tribe, and maybe Dan as well, but each tribe had a discrete portion that was theirs. It was their tribes. And all the whole tribe lived together. And then if someone died, their sons will inherit it, so it'll stay within, the land will stay within the tribe and will stay within the family. But now that the daughters of Tzalafchad are inheriting a portion in the land inheriting their father's portion, so now they're saying there's an issue. When presumably these daughters of Tzalafchad will get married, they'll have children of their own. So those sons will be, if they have sons, will be from the tribe of whatever tribe their husband is, whatever tribe the father of their sons is, which may very well not be from the tribe of Manasseh. So he says, so what's going to be? Now we're going to have this area within our own lands that belongs to a different tribe. And that bothered them. They wanted their tribal land to belong to their tribe, and that's it. And there's also another issue, is that they can't buy it from them because the land of Israel was given to each family and to each person and each Jew for all eternity. And if a Jew were to sell the land, it would return to them on the Yovel. So any sale of the land of Israel is not a permanent sale. It's only a sale until the Yovel, till the Jubilee year, which comes around every 50 years, and then it returns to the original owner, to the original family. So this will be in perpetuity going to if these daughters of Tzalafchad, if any of them married someone from outside the tribe, it will go to a different tribe and belong to a different tribe for all eternity. And that disturbed them, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. There's a reason why each portion was given to one tribe, and it was unified in the hands of the tribe. So in verse 5, it states, Moshe commanded the children of Israel according to the word of Hashem, saying, correctly does the tribe of the children of Joseph speak. They are correct, that this is really against what the will of Hashem, that the land of one tribe should be transferred into the hands of someone of another tribe. And let them be wives to whomever is good in their eyes, but only to the family of their father shall they become wives. And our sages understand that this wasn't a commandment that they were prohibited from marrying anyone from outside of their tribe, but they are suggested, strongly advised to marry within their tribe. That's what they should do. The right thing to do is to marry someone from their own tribe in order that the land should stay with the tribe of Manasseh. And in verse 10, it states, as Hashem had commanded Moshe, on page 935, verse 10, as Hashem had commanded Moshe, so did the daughters of Tzalafchad do. Machla, Tirza, Chagla, Milka, Noah, the daughters of Tzalafchad, became wives to sons of their uncles, to cousins from the families of the children of Manasseh, son of Yosef, did they become wives, and their inheritance remained with the tribe of the family of their father. And the Parsha concludes, and the Seder of Bamidbar concludes in verse 13, these are the commandments and the ordinances that Hashem had commanded through Moshe to the children of Israel in the plains of Moab at the Jordan by Jericho. Chazak, Chazak, Yunis Chazek.